David Lammy is facing allegations that he's unfit for office. I will forever be amazed that Sir Keir Starmer saw this clip.
Implication, you're comparing the ERG to the Nazi party, or at least to the South African racists. Now, whatever you think about the ERG, that was an unacceptable comparison, wasn't it?
Andrew, I would say that wasn't strong enough.
Yeah, and thought that he should be our Foreign Secretary. I will be forever amazed as well that this man here has managed to rise to the esteemed office of Foreign Secretary, but now he has, and his alleged incompetence will have real-world consequences for all of us. Yesterday, David Lammy used his first big speech in government to say this.
Certain UK arms exports to Israel, there does exist a clear risk that they might be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law. I have informed my right honourable friend, the Business and Trade Secretary, and he is therefore today announcing the suspension of around 30 from a total of approximately 350. These include equipment that we assess is for use in the current conflict in Gaza.
Yeah, that was on the day that Israeli families were laying the bodies of Hamas's hostages to rest. Shocking timing, isn't it? Israel is our big democratic ally in the region, full of vile Islamist nutcases who want to obliterate us and our way of life. Has David Lammy sided with those nutcases? Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu certainly thinks so. He did write on X, "This is a shameful decision, will not change Israel's determination to defeat Hamas, a genocidal terrorist organisation that savagely murdered 1,200 people on October the 7th, including 14 British citizens. Hamas is holding over 100 hostages, including 5 British citizens. Instead of standing with Israel, a fellow democracy defending itself against barbarism, Britain's misguided decision will only embolden Hamas." Well, who's our other biggest ally? Well, it's the Americans, isn't it? How do they feel? Well, they say that Lammy lied to them. He assured them he wouldn't do this. He hasn't even managed to appease the far left, though, has he? Labour MP Zahra al-Sultan is still calling for a full arms embargo. He'll never appease that lot. The only people Mr Lammy is pleased are Hamas, and he's delivered a disaster class in how to be a rubbish politician. But we all know why he and Starmer did this, don't we? Labour lost a lot of the Muslim vote at the last election, and they'll keep doing things like this to try to appease them. I think it does beg the question, who is really running Britain? Let's get thoughts from my panel this evening. On columnist and broadcaster Esther Krakow, Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolfe, and the political commentator, Jonathan Liss. Stephen, I'll start with you again on this. You know, David Lammy here, is he dangerously incompetent, do you think?
I think it's dangerously stupid Foreign Office politics to be able to isolate one of the allies that we have in the Middle East, in Israel, in order to really support, as you quite rightly said, those voters that have left the Labour Party, gone after the Gang of Five, for example, that we talked about earlier, who really want to no longer vote for the Labour Party unless they are stronger on Palestine. But as you've seen, the fact that he's only getting rid of a few weapons is hardly going to do any damage to Israel in the long run. It's just really a shibboleth out to those people to try and say, look, we are listening, we are trying to do something. But I remember that scene from Yes, Prime Minister, where there was a discussion between the Prime Minister and the civil servant about selling arms to the Red Brigade terrorists. And the civil servant said, at the end of the day, Prime Minister, we may not be selling some of them, but they'll get them anyway, because our business is business of Britain to sell them to Israel. And Israel will get them in their own way. They will carry on doing this. But I think at the end of the day, he's made a massive mistake by not supporting...
He's alienated everybody. He's angered the Israelis. The Americans are saying, a source anyway was coming out basically said he's lied to them openly about it. He's not appeased the hard left whatsoever. And, you know, I just don't quite understand why he's doing it. I mean, my view on this is that he's decided that he wants to try to appease the Muslim vote in Britain. Well,
I think David Lammy is quite clearly out of his depth. I think one of the things that we have to realise is what message does this send? He's saying that this is based on legal sort of quandary, that there's potential for sort of international human rights violation. But that doesn't really add up, because even if the question is that there is the potential, it hasn't been proven. So it's kind of like innocent until proven guilty. And also, since 2021, Britain has sent over £17 billion worth of arms to countries with proven human rights records abuses, like Saudi Arabia, like Egypt, like Qatar, like Bahrain, like Turkey. So there's an inconsistency in our foreign policy which clearly makes this decision look political rather than legal. And then if it is political, who has he helped? No one in Britain is happy. None of his allies or backbenchers are going to be happy because he's not calling for a complete ceasefire. This is only emboldening Hamas, who are happy. But this isn't it. He's not saying we're not going to sell you arms unless you call for a ceasefire. His excuse, because I'm being very forensic about this, what he has said is this is because of the potential for international human rights violations. That's fine, but then we're going to look at this quite forensically. If that is the case, why are we still selling arms to the likes of the Saudis, who... Does everyone remember the murder of Jamal Khashoggi? They chopped him up and barbecued him like a goat, basically, at the back of the embassy in Turkey. Like, if we're selling arms to those people, I'm sorry, there's something inconsistent. We can all agree that we want this fighting to stop. I've been very critical of Israel on many occasions. Yeah. But we can also agree that Hamas cannot be part of the equation moving forward.
But it's also on top of that as well.
And this is just emboldening.
Israel is basically our only ally in that region. We have now a shared enemy, and David Lammy has just made that enemy very happy.
It's not our only not our only ally in the region. We're allies with many countries in the region. Jordan, look, a lot of those countries I don't think we should be allied with. I actually think that we should have had an arms embargo against Saudi Arabia. Look, Lammy said, and I don't understand this vendetta against David Lammy, we've had in the last few years Dominic Raab and Liz Truss among our foreign secretaries. I'm very happy with David Lammy in that company. But
Dominic Raab, just to push back on that slightly, stopped a civil servant signing off Gibraltar to the Spanish without a shot being fired. So actually, I'm quite happy we did have Dominic Raab.
Dominic Raab, well, we don't need to argue about Dominic Raab. I think most people think
he was far more competent than Liz Truss.
That's, I think we can agree. I think we can certainly agree on that point. We can certainly agree on that point.
Dominic Raab and Liz Truss were much stronger than, say, David Lammy.
Absolutely not. It's all about... It's not a football match, Stephen. It's not about who you support.
I'll put this to you, right? I've got a little clip here which might beg to differ as to exactly how competent David Lammy is as an individual. I think we can just
you're not going to
play this.
Are you going?
Yeah.
Who acceded to the English throne at the age of 9 on the death of his father Henry VIII in 1547?
Henry VII.
Edward VI.
Why are you like this?
What?
Is he fit to be our foreign secretary?
Well, because he didn't get a question right in Mastermind. Come on.
I knew you were going to play that video.
This is
well, I do think there's something to be said about the fact that we're always talking about we don't want Britain to be part of foreign wars, and the reason why there's so many refugees coming is because we've destabilised their countries in other regions. The ways to get out of foreign conflicts is to have strong allies around the world who can actually intercede when there are issues. Israel being an ally is not just because we want sort of supporters in that region. It's also to keep us out of regions that are going to increasingly destabilise.
Friendship is not about giving unconditional support to people. It's about standing up to people where necessary.
But that's not what
it's not about granting carte blanche for crimes against humanity, which the senior prosecutor at the ICC has said Netanyahu is likely guilty of.
In the back of the head.
And Hamas has also been found liable. Has also recommended Hamas to give war crimes.
Then Israel go and get the bodies back, and on the day that happens, David Lammy decides, along with Keir Starmer,
when is there going to be good timing?
What we should do is withdraw some arms sales to Israel.
When is there going to be a good time for this?
Who and what is going to be happy about this particular decision? Is David Lammy happy about him getting criticised from one side of his party, who is saying he's not gone far enough, to those allies of ours in the United States and Israel who are saying it's the wrong thing to do? And then the metrics, as you say, is that Hamas are going to look as though that they've managed to succeed in persuading other countries to damage the relationships with Israel.
I'm sorry, but I kind of feel like I'm in a parallel universe. It's not about Hamas. It's about, does Britain believe in international law?
It should be about
yes
Hamas,
or no?
though.
Does Britain think that war crimes are good or bad? I hope the answer to that would be that Britain would think war crimes are bad. And if our own foreign office and the officials in the foreign office and the experts around
they also think Hamas are committing war crimes.
That's right, and we're not arming them either, Patrick. If the people in the foreign office are sort of confident or suspicious that some British arms exports are being used in the service of war crimes, it is actually legally incumbent upon the UK government to suspend those arms. Now, this is a fraction of the total number of arms that the UK is sending to Israel anyway.
It's a fraction. And how are they deciding which particular arms are causing these so-called infractions of international law?
They're parts of equipment.
And
I think it should be a blanket. Look, this is not a left-wing position.
Well, the nuts and bolts.
That well-known communist pro-Palestine activist Margaret Thatcher instituted an arms export, an arms embargo on Israel in the late 1980s, which lasted for 5 years. That other well-known communist and pro-Palestine activist, Tony Blair, did something similar in the early 2000s.
Bombed the Middle East.
In the early 2000s.
Information. Well, I mean, yeah, all right. I wouldn't necessarily bring him into this. Before he gave the IRA letters of comfort.
Okay, well, I'm not defending Tony Blair or Margaret Thatcher. I'm saying that there is something right on that.
Is it going to achieve anything at all?
I think that's my issue.
Upsetting people.
I think it's not going to achieve anything. And the thing is, I think you seem to be under the impression that we don't want to enter into this conflict or any of that. I have been very critical, but also you have to be fair. If you are assuming that there are human rights violations happening, you need to actually confirm that, because we know that the UK has been exporting arms to countries with verified human rights abuse records, and we haven't banned. We haven't. No, hold on. But that's the point. We still are. If you're going to make that case, you have to verify. That's the thing. I've often made the case, and I've been very critical, particularly of Benjamin Netanyahu, who I think is probably the most shameless man walking on the planet. But that is not how you conduct foreign affairs. Israel and the UK will exist far longer than after we kick out Keir Starmer and his government out of power. And you're going to have to ask the question, what is this going to do to our long-term relationship with one of our allies in the region? Because we either have allies or we go into regions that are destabilised at our own cost. That's the reality.
Israel is now going to look at the government in the UK and all the issues that we've seen about anti-Semitism in the streets, the way that we'd sack business, and they're going to look at the country and saying we're now becoming anti-Israeli and
I'm sorry, Stephen, come on.
And that might push them closer to the Chinese,
I'm asking yourself
for example.
to put yourself in their shoes, and what are they going to be saying to their people? What would their people do? And I'm not saying that all Israelis are generic, that they're all the same. We know that there's disputes going on in the streets of Israel as well.
They literally want Netanyahu out. The Israeli government is not the same as Israel, and Israel is not the same as Judaism, and Judaism is not the same as British Jews.
They did win an election again.
What I find so awful about this debate is how, and I thought it was completely outrageous, by the way, and I'm speaking as a British Jew, by the way, the chief rabbi today and the British Board of Deputies of Jews are coming out with statements that almost seem to be mouthpieces for the Israeli government, saying it's completely horrendous. They are there to speak on behalf of British Jews, and by the way, they don't speak on behalf of a lot of British Jews, but that's a separate issue. They are not there to intervene in matters of foreign policy, and I think it's so dangerous to conflate Israel and Judaism. They are not the same thing. We would not accept an anti-Israel protest outside a synagogue. That would be completely anti-Semitic. It therefore follows that we need to separate this out, and that Jewish people, that the Jewish leaders should not make statements.
But sorry, hang on a minute. We have had anti-Israel protests.
And that's completely outrageous to have them outside synagogues. You have anti-Israel protests outside the Israeli embassy.
Outside a cinema showing Jewish films.
Right, and that's completely wrong. That's completely wrong.
We have seen tidal wave of anti-Semitism. Who does this please, this decision that David Lammy made? The anti-Semites?
No, it doesn't please the anti-Semites. It will please people who don't think that Britain should be supporting and facilitating war crimes.
End of. And Hamas.
No.
Well, I'm just saying that's not an allegation you should throw around unless you verify it. I completely get your perspective, but you can't.
Those who are supporting this policy are going to see towards those who are supporting Hamas. And I think that's the difficulty. You're not being able to understand that they will see this as a victory. Even though you might see it as a nice step forward to what you want to achieve.
All right, guys. Well, look, we've overrun there, but I think we could reason.